welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. 10 weeks of increasingly violent confrontations between police and protesters have plunged Hong Kong into its worst crisis since it's reverted from British to Chinese rule in 1997. Clashes have escalated in recent days, with Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam warning the city could be pushed into an abyss. Meanwhile, China threatened to intervene if the unrest continue. To talk more about the current situation in Hong Kong, we welcome to our studio today Olha Tsurkan. She is a bureau member, International Federation of Liberal Youth. Hello, and thank you for joining.
Hello.
So, what's your evaluation of the situation that is currently ongoing in Hong Kong?
The situation is indeed very, very difficult and alarming, and violence is increasing with every day. And as you mentioned, military forces nearby Chinese borders also impose threats to the situation in the city, as well as brutal actions taken by the local police.
Well, for now, China is only threatening to intervene in the situation, yet it's not hiding the fact that the intervention itself is going to have the military character. Nevertheless, for now, it has not yet happened. So let's talk about the reasons why the clashes sparkled, why the protests actually happened and are still happening.
Well, the reason for the current protests are traced back to February 2019, when government of Hong Kong proposed to adopt an extradition law that could allow extradite people to the countries with which Hong Kong do not have separate extradition agreements, and that would mean that evaluating cases on a case-by-case basis, they could extradite any person they want without even having in-person trials. And this was regarded by democratic movements, by many youth organizations, human rights organizations, lawyers in Hong Kong as a direct threat to their democracy and a possibility to jeopardize one country to system principle on which the Hong Kong function as a special administrative
China,
region.
Basically.
Yes.
So what could be the outcome? How, except for a violent way, how should the government of China and the officials of Hong Kong react or maybe cooperate in order to stop the violence?
Well, first of all, it should be mentioned that according to the chief executive of government of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, the draft law was postponed, although the protesters demanded its total withdrawal.
Elimination.
Yes.
Fine.
So this raised another set of concerns, and the movement that started against one piece of legislation is now transforming into the movement against Chinese meddling into Hong Kong democracy. And now we can see additional demands on the part of the protesters.
Expanding the borders of democracy in Hong Kong, or expanding the borders of the Hong Kong being, well, let's say, expanding Hong Kong's independency from China. Let's phrase it this way.
I would say not expanding Hong Kong democracy or independence from China, but stopping China from meddling into democracy of Hong Kong. And one of the demands is resignation of Carrie Lam and her government, and grant of the universal suffrage to all citizens of Hong Kong to elect legislative council and head of Hong Kong government. Actually, it is an obligation undertaken by China after this signing of Sino-British joint declaration when Hong Kong returned to the country and was granted this special administrative status.
Do you think this is what's going to happen?
As we see now, protests reached a totally new level. Although such actions were happening starting from 2002, And we have already witnessed several revolutions, namely Umbrella Revolution. However, the level of protests and the level of forces used before wasn't the same as it is now. That is why there are some hopes that government, first of all, government of Hong Kong would comply with the demands of the protesters and would stop use of brutal forces and will start dialogue with the protesters.
Okay, so a dialogue with the protesters is one case scenario. Another case scenario, we already talked about it, is the interference of China, intervention, military intervention. Let's talk about this scenario. In case the protests do not come down and China has to intervene, how do you see the development of the situation further on in this case?
Well, it is noteworthy that every time when there are protests in Hong Kong, there are also Chinese military forces near the borders. And as of today, there are no cases when Chinese forces intervened in the territory.
The Chinese ambassador to the UK already said that he would urge the government of China to do that, and some other European countries have also stated that they stick to the point of view that China should intervene, except for the US. Well, the US is not a European country, but its president, Donald Trump, said, and I quote here, he hopes that China will humanly solve the problem. He said, I am concerned. I wouldn't want to see a violent crackdown.
As we are all constantly in touch with Hong Kong activists, what they tell us is that such statements and also this spread of footages of military near the borders are always used as a threat, as a way to manipulate inhabitants of Hong Kong. And the direct intervention would in all ways jeopardize the mentioned one country, two systems principle, and then question the validity of the agreement signed before between Britain and China. So there will be international legal consequences of such intervention. At the same time, we shouldn't forget that basic law of Hong Kong allows for the Hong Kong government to ask a Chinese Liberation Army for help. And the representatives of this Chinese Liberation Army are actually based inside Hong Kong. There are around of 6,000 people there. And then the question is if the government of Hong Kong will resort to using internal forces based there.
Well, hopefully the violence will stop and the protests will come down and the situation will resolve in the most peaceful way. Thank you so much for coming and giving your comment.
Thank you very much.
That was Olha Tsurkan. She is a bureau member and International Federation of Liberal Youth. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned with UATV for the rest.